The work order said the hydro reclamation array on level 4 had a pressure fault in junction C7. It did not say anything about a child. I found the fault at 6:20, before the rest of the platform had properly woken up. The Vithrani Agricultural Collective's orbital station Myrth 7 was not a comfortable place at any hour, but in the early morning, before the circulation fans kicked to full and the grow lights on the upper decks ramped to their daytime setting, it had a stillness I had learned to work inside. 4 years on the station. I knew every pipe, every seal, every place the composite hull flexed when the tidal pull from the gas giant below shifted half a degree. I knew where to step so the deck plates didn't ring. I knew which access panels needed a second push and which jammed if you used your left hand. I knew the smell of the level 4 corridor at 600, the particular combination of recirculated air and the faint mineral note of the hydro reclamation system doing its work, the way you know the smell of your own house. What I did not know, until I pulled back the panel on junction C7 and aimed my work lamp into the crawl space, was that someone had been living there. Not for long, a few hours maybe. There was a folded piece of insulating membrane pressed flat against the pipe casing on the right-hand side, the warm side, where the recirculated water ran at 32 degrees. On top of it, a small shape wrapped in something that had once been a collective maintenance coverall, 2 sizes too large, folded and refolded until it made a rough sort of envelope. The shape inside was breathing, slowly, with great deliberate effort, the way small things breathe when they have decided that being very still is the same as being invisible. I turned my lamp down, not off, just down. The shape did not move. I sat back on my heels and looked at the crawl space and thought about my work order, which was for a pressure fault in junction C7, and which said nothing about this. The pressure fault was in the secondary feed coupling. I could see it from where I was sitting. A hairline fracture in the sleeve, not dangerous yet, but it would be by the end of the week. 40 minutes of work. I had the parts in my kit. I looked at the shape in the coverall. I looked at the coupling. I looked at the shape again. I set down my kit, reached into my chest pocket, and found the grain bar I had brought for breakfast. I broke off the smaller half, set it on the deck plate just inside the access panel, not inside the crawl space, just at the edge, and then I turned my lamp back to full and fixed the coupling. I took my time about it. I have always taken my time. 4 years on Myrth 7, 8 years before that on the surface platforms in the Veth Outer Ring, 12 years before that in the Compact's Water Systems Division doing emergency reclamation on flooded colony moons. The work is always the same if you do it right. You look at what is broken. You understand why it broke. You fix it cleanly and you do not leave a mess. You do not rush the diagnosis and you do not rush the repair, because a job done fast and wrong costs you twice. The coupling took 38 minutes. When I sealed the panel and began packing my kit, I looked at the grain bar I had left at the edge of the access panel. It was gone. I closed my kit. I wrote up the completed work order on my tablet. Under notes I wrote, secondary feed coupling replaced, junction C7, area inspected, no further faults identified. That was true. There were no further faults in junction C7. I picked up my kit and walked back to the engineering bay. She was at the panel again the next morning. I knew because I had left the panel seated but unlatched, and it was still that way when I came to do my 6:30 rounds. There were no new work orders on level 4, but I do my rounds regardless. I have always done my rounds. You do not wait for the work orders to tell you where to look. You look at everything, and the work orders confirm what you have already found. I sat down outside the panel the same way I had the day before. I did not open it. I just sat against the bulkhead and drank the coffee from my thermos, which was the dark kind that the collective's commissary stocked in the second cabinet from the left, and which was better than it had any right to be given how remote we were. 300 kilometers above the gas giant Orvith. The nearest transit hub 4 hours by fast shuttle. The nearest settled population, 1,000 Vithrani families on a surface agriculture moon, 2 days by freighter. I drank my coffee and looked at the panel. After about 4 minutes the panel moved, just a fraction, just enough to show a line of darkness at the edge and then nothing. I kept my eyes on my coffee. After another 2 minutes a hand appeared at the edge of the panel, small, lavender-colored, 3 fingers and a thumb, the nails the pale silver white of the Vithrani species' younger members. The hand stayed there on the edge of the panel perfectly still for a long time, testing the air maybe, testing me. The fingers were slightly spread as if taking a reading, and I thought of the way a technician opens a panel before committing to the interior. The pause, the assessment, the decision to proceed or to withdraw. I drank my coffee. The hand withdrew, the panel was still. I refilled the cap of my thermos, set it at the edge of the panel and walked on. Her name, I learned later, was Vale. But that came later. For the first 4 days, she was just the hand at the edge of the panel, the shape that breathed deliberately in the warm space beside the recirculation pipes, the small being who left no trace except that the grain bar was always gone, and once, on the 3rd day, a single silver-white hair caught on the panel edge, which I left where it was. On the 5th day, I was doing the 6:30 rounds when I heard voices from the corridor junction at the far end of level 4. Not the engineers or the agricultural technicians. Different voices. The sharp, precise cadence of compact administrative personnel, which I recognized because I had spent 8 years working in compact territory, and you learn the sound of it. The slight elevation of register that means someone is speaking for the record. The careful enunciation that means whatever is said is being logged. I moved to the junction before I thought about moving to the junction, which tells you something about how the body knows things before the mind catches up. There were 2 of them, both in compact civil assessment coveralls, the dove-gray kind with the collar insignia of the Water Rights Compliance Division. They had a scanning unit between them, the kind used for population audits on transit vessels, a large unit, not a handheld, mounted on a rolling base. One of them was holding a tablet with a photograph on it. I stepped into the junction, and they looked at me. "Water systems," I said, and held up my kit. "We're looking for an unauthorized occupant on this level," the one with the tablet said. He had the flat, efficient manner of someone who conducts these conversations many times a week. "You seen anything unusual?" "Pressure fault on C7 yesterday," I said. "Fixed. No other incidents." He held the tablet toward me. The photograph was small and grainy, pulled from a transit registry, I thought, or a customs manifest. It showed a Vithrani child. Small, pointed ears, oversized eyes the color of pale amber, silver-white hair in 2 careful plaits that had begun to come undone on one side as though she had slept on them. "Seen this individual?" he asked. I looked at the photograph for the amount of time it takes to genuinely consider a question. I looked at the pale eyes in the photograph, which looked back at the camera with the complete stillness of a child who has learned that cameras are not to be trusted. "No," I said. He pulled the tablet back. The other one was writing something on his own tablet. They thanked me, the rote kind of thanks that is not thanks, the kind that is a punctuation mark, and moved on down the corridor. I went back to the access panel on junction C7. I sat down against the bulkhead. The platform hummed around me. Somewhere in the distance, the compliance team moved through the level 4 corridor, their rolling scanner making a slight sound on the deck plates. After a moment, I said quietly to the panel, "If there is anyone in that crawl space, this would be a good time to be very still and very quiet." The panel did not move. Good, I thought. I spent the rest of that day doing what I would have done anyway, my rounds. I have a routine on Myearth 7 that covers all 4 levels and the outer ring by noon and the upper deck, array systems, by 1700. I have done it so many times that I can do it without consulting my tablet. I know this platform the way I know my own hands. Which panel sticks in damp weather? Which seal has been repaired 3 times and will need replacing before the next dry season cycle? Which viewport has a microfracture in the composite that is within tolerance, but that I check every week because it is within tolerance, and therefore the kind of thing that stops being within tolerance when you stop checking. The compact compliance team left at 1340 on the shuttle that goes back to the Leth transfer hub on Tuesdays and Fridays. I watched it go from the viewport in the Level 3 observation corridor. 2 gray coveralled figures with their scanner and their tablet, moving through the docking collar with the efficient purposefulness of people who have not found what they came for but who expect to return. I went back to Level 4. I sat down outside the panel again. I had brought a second grain bar and a small sealed cup of broth from the commissary, which was Vithrani style, with the particular blend of root vegetables that the collective's nutritional database had identified as appropriate for young members of that species. It was the same broth the collective served to any Vithrani crew member on a cold shift rotation. I had requested it under Engineering Staff Nutritional Supplement, which was accurate in the sense that it was a supplement, and it was for someone on the engineering deck. I set the broth and the grain bar at the edge of the panel. The panel opened. Not all the way, a quarter of the way, and there she was, looking at me from inside the crawl space with amber eyes that were too large for her small face and too old for the face they were in. She looked at me the way a creature looks at something it has decided is not going to attack it, which is different from the way a creature looks at something it trusts. It is a very specific kind of stillness, and it costs something to hold. I have seen it before, in flooded colony systems, where the populations had been waiting too long for help that came too slowly. The stillness of people who have done the calculation and determined that hope is a resource they cannot afford to spend carelessly. I did not move. She looked at the broth, she looked at me, she looked at the broth again. Then she reached out, took the broth and pulled it back into the crawl space. The panel stayed a quarter open. I could hear her drinking. I refilled the cap of my thermos and had my own coffee. We sat like that for about 20 minutes, me on one side of the panel with my coffee, her on the other with the broth. The Level 4 circulation fans made their steady noise. Somewhere above us, the grow lights were cycling through their afternoon ramp. It was, I thought, not an unpleasant way to spend 20 minutes. When the broth was done, the cup appeared at the edge of the panel, returned. Both hands wrapped around it, holding it toward me, and I took it and said, "Thank you," because that seemed like the right thing to say. The panel closed. I sat there a while longer. Then I went and did the Level 3 water reclamation diagnostics, which were overdue by 2 days. I did not tell anyone about her. This requires some explanation, because I am not in the habit of concealing things. 4 years on Myearth 7, and I have the same relationship with the collective station commander, a solid Vithrani woman named Orvath, that I have had with every station commander I have ever worked under. I do my job, I file my reports accurately, and I do not cause problems. In return, they leave my maintenance schedule alone and do not ask me to attend the optional community meals. Orvath was a fair commander. Myearth 7 was a functioning platform because she ran it that way. I had no quarrel with her. But the compact compliance team had come with a population scanner and a photograph of a child, and they had not come to ensure the child was safe. I have worked in compact water rights territory long enough to know the difference between an inspection that is about welfare and one that is about leverage. The Water Rights Compliance Division does not run welfare checks. It runs compliance checks, and the only thing a Vithrani child would be in compliance with is whatever treaty clause had made a Vithrani child politically useful to someone. So I did not tell anyone. What I did instead was adjust my rounds so that I passed junction C7 4 times a day. I began bringing additional nutritional supplements, always logged under legitimate categories, always consistent with the station's standard Vithrani dietary provisions. I found in the engineering supply locker a thermal wrap that had been there since before I arrived and was listed as surplus inventory. I left it at the edge of the panel one morning along with the grain bar and said nothing about it. The next morning the thermal wrap was inside the crawl space. She had pulled it in and folded it with a precision that suggested someone had taught her, a long time ago, how things should be folded. On the 8th day, she opened the panel all the way. She sat in the opening and looked at me. She had the amber eyes and the silver-white hair and the pointed ears and the too careful stillness of a child who has learned that her stillness is a tool. She was wearing the maintenance coverall she had been sleeping in, which was so large on her that she had rolled the sleeves and cuffs to the point of structural instability. She had the thermal wrap around her shoulders. Her silver-white hair was in 2 plaits, slightly uneven, tied with what appeared to be the cord from one of the coverall's internal pockets. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, in Vithrani, which I speak well enough after 4 years on the platform, "You gave them the wrong answer." "Did I?" I said. "You said you hadn't seen me. You had seen me." "I had not seen you since the previous morning," I said. "That was true." She thought about that. Her amber eyes did the particular thing that Vithrani eyes do when they are considering something, the faint iridescent shift across the iris, which the research literature attributes to the species' heightened ocular response to cognitive processing. I had read about it in the platform's Crew Welfare Handbook, which covers Vithrani physiological indicators. I had not actually seen it before. It was more striking in person, and slower than I had expected, like watching a thought move. "You are a careful speaker," she said. "I try to be," I said. She looked at me a while longer. Then she said, with the directness of someone who has decided that social preamble wastes time, "I don't like people." "All right," I said. "I'm telling you so you don't misunderstand." "I appreciate that," I said. She pulled the thermal wrap tighter around her small shoulders. "The broth was good," she said. "Yesterday's was better than today's." "I'll note that," I said. She looked at me, the iris shift again. "You are strange," she said. "I have been told that," I said. She did not respond to that. She sat in the opening of the panel for another few minutes, studying the level 4 corridor with the thoroughness of a small engineer assessing an unfamiliar system. The ceiling, the pipe runs, the junction markers, the spacing of the overhead lamp panels. Then she withdrew, and the panel closed, and I went and did my rounds. I learned her name from the collective's registry, the Vithrani House database, which I accessed through the standard engineering interface, because the Environmental Systems module sits on the same network partition as the Crew Welfare database. Listed a Vale Orath, 11 standard years, Vithrani House 2nd branch, registered passenger aboard the transit vessel Veth Sauron, last manifested at the Leth Transfer Hub 6 days before I found her in the crawl space. House 2nd branch, Vithrani, which meant, under the house protocol structure I knew from 4 years of working on a Vithrani-operated platform, that she was not the daughter of anyone in the main succession line. She was the daughter of the princess consort. I sat with that for a while. The princess consort of the Vithrani house was not a political figure, not in the way that counted on the compact's ledger. She was a secondary branch holder, a title with ceremonial weight and no treaty standing, but a secondary branch holder's child, registered on a transit manifest to an agricultural platform during an active water rights compliance review. That was leverage of a specific kind, and the Water Rights Compliance Division knew the value of specific kinds of leverage. I went and fixed a seal on the level 2 desalination array that I had been meaning to address for a week. I took longer than usual. The seal needed it, and I needed the time. On the 11th day, the panel opened in the middle of my afternoon rounds, which was not the usual time, and she came out. Not just to the opening, all the way out. She was carrying the thermal wrap in a bundle under one arm, the way children carry things they have decided belong to them. She stood in the corridor, small, very upright, silver plates redone with a neatness that must have taken considerable effort, given that she had no mirror and apparently no pins. So I estimated she had used the thin tie cord from the maintenance coverall as a binding, and she looked at me with the amber eyes and said, "I want to see the water." "Which water?" I said. "The planet, the one below." I thought about the observation corridor on level 3, which had the best viewport on the station and which was, at 14:30 on a Tuesday, unlikely to have anyone in it. "All right," I said. She walked beside me through level 4, up the access ladder to level 3. She climbed it without hesitation, which told me she was not afraid of heights or confined spaces, and down the observation corridor to the main viewport. She walked with the particular quality of motion that belongs to children who have been told many times to walk quietly and have made it an unconscious habit. Her feet were almost silent on the deck plates. At the viewport she stopped. Below us, through the reinforced composite panel, the gas giant Orvith filled the lower third of the view. Not blue, not quite. A layered thing, banded in deep teal and the particular amber gray of its upper atmospheric layer, with the storm systems turning slowly in the dark bands between. The agricultural platform's orbit took us over the planetary shadow once per rotation, and we were currently at the approach, the Terminator line cutting across the gas giant's face with that absolute geometric precision you only see from orbit. The kind of clean line that does not exist on the surface of anything. She put both hands on the viewport glass. She looked at it for a long time without saying anything. "On my planet," she said finally, "the water is rising. My mother told me. She said that by the time I am grown, the place where she grew up will be under the sea." I looked at the gas giant turning below us. "My mother grew up near a coast," I said. "On Earth, a place called a delta." She said the same thing. Vale looked at me, the iris shift. "Is it gone now?" "Parts of it," I said. "Other parts are still there." She looked back at the viewport. She said we are lucky to have platforms, that some people have nothing to stand on. "That's true," I said. She was quiet for a while. The planet turned. One of the storm systems in the lower band moved slightly, or seemed to, the scale making what was a planetary event look like the slow turn of something deliberate. She said the platforms were built because some people were willing to pay for platforms, and the people who were not willing to pay were left in the water. "That is also true," I said. "She is trying to change that," Vale said. "That is what she does. She talks to the people who own the platforms, and she talks to the people who are in the water, and she tries to make them understand that the platforms are big enough for more people." She said this in a level tone, the way she said everything. Not performed, just accurate. The people who own the platforms do not want more people on them. "No," I said, "they don't." She looked at me. "You are on a platform," she said. "I fixed the platform," I said. "That is different." She considered that. "How?" "I don't decide who stands on it," I said. "I decide that the pipes work for whoever is standing on it." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "I don't understand why the people who have platforms don't let the people who have nothing stand on them." I had thought about this question in various forms for approximately 30 years. I had not arrived at an answer that satisfied me. "I don't either," I said. She considered that. "I thought grown adults understood things." "Some things," I said. She looked at the gas giant. She looked at her own hands on the viewport glass, the lavender fingers splayed, 3 fingers and a thumb on each hand. She said, still looking at her hands, "My mother is trying to get the platforms shared. That is why the compact people came. They don't want her to." I had worked out most of this already, but hearing it said aloud, in the precise and unsentimental voice of an 11-year-old who had clearly been in proximity to adult political conversation for most of her life, made it concrete in a different way. Abstract leverage becomes a real thing when the child it is being used against is standing in front of you looking at a gas giant through a viewport. "What happened on the transit vessel?" I said. "The Veth Sauron." She did not look at me. "They came aboard at the Leth hub, 2 of them, in the gray suits. They said they needed to speak to my mother about a compliance matter. My mother told me to go to the forward cargo section and wait. She said she would come for me." She paused. "She did not come. You came here instead," I said. "The cargo section connects to the platform's docking collar. I know how docking collars work." She said this in a tone that was not boastful, just factual, the way she said everything. "I found a maintenance access. I followed the warm pipes." A pause, the faintest thing in her voice that was not quite anything, and then gone. "The warm pipes are always the right direction." "They are," I said. This was true. Any water systems engineer will tell you the same thing. Heat is always worth following in a system you don't know. It tells you where the work is happening. She finally turned from the viewport and looked at me directly. The amber eyes, the careful stillness. "My mother is not on the vessel anymore," she said. "I have been monitoring the docking records on the engineering network." She said this without any indication that accessing the docking records through the engineering network was anything other than a reasonable and obvious course of action. She was transferred to the compliance station at Leth 7 3 days ago. Administrative hold, pending review of treaty documentation. Administrative hold, pending review of treaty documentation. What that meant, translated into plain language: she is being held until she agrees to withdraw her water rights position, after which the hold will be lifted, and the review will conclude with whatever outcome the Compliance Division has already determined. The treaty documentation is real. The review is not. The review is a room where you wait until you agree to stop. I looked at Vale of the Vithrani second house, standing in the observation corridor of the agricultural platform, with her thermal wrap under one arm and her silver plate secured with maintenance cord, and I understood why she had not liked me. She did not dislike me specifically. She had been placed, by a set of circumstances arranged by adults with political interests, in a situation where trusting anyone was a vulnerability she could not afford. She had run the cost calculation that any intelligent small being runs when the world has demonstrated that adults can be used against you. She had determined, correctly, that disliking everyone was the safest operating parameter. She had given me the broth cup back. She had told me, 8 days later, that my answer to the compliance officers was a careful one. She had come out of the crawl space today and walked beside me to look at the planet, and showed me the thing her mother had told her about rising water. These were not the actions of a child who disliked me. They were the actions of a child who was, very cautiously, revising an assessment. I looked at the gas giant turning below us, and I thought about the Water Rights Compliance Division, and what it would do if I filed a crew welfare report flagging an unauthorized minor aboard Myrth 7. I thought about what it would do if I did not. I thought about what I had spent 30 years doing, which was keeping systems running, water systems primarily. The distribution of water across populations, which sounds technical and is technical, but which is also, if you spend enough years at it, a moral question. There is enough water. There is almost always enough of the things people need. The question is never the resource. The question is always the pipe. Who controls it, who it reaches, and who decided it would not reach the others. That decision is never made by the pipe. It is made by the people with money enough to build platforms, and the inclination to limit who stands on them. I had fixed a lot of pipes. I had bent the distribution toward function rather than control as much as a water systems engineer can, which is not as much as it should be, but is not nothing. "All right," I said. Vale looked at me. "All right, what?" "I'm going to make some calls," I said. "Do you want to come back to the engineering bay, or would you prefer the crawl space?" She thought about this with the gravity it deserved. "The engineering bay," she said. "The crawl space is warm, but the ambient moisture level is slightly high for long-term comfort." "Noted," I said. The calls took the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening. I knew a number of people. This is one of the things that accumulates over 30 years in the Water Systems Division. You know people, in the way that a person who has moved between platforms and stations and flooded colony moons accumulates contacts the way infrastructure accumulates mineral deposit, slowly, without intention, in layers. Some of those people had moved into administrative positions. Some of them were still in the field. Some of them were in the Compact's environmental compliance structure, which is distinct from the Water Rights Compliance Division, and which has, in certain circumstances, concurrent jurisdiction over cases involving the welfare of minor dependents aboard licensed agricultural platforms. I made my calls from the engineering bay at the communications console, which is a perfectly normal place for a water systems engineer to make calls. Vale sat on a stool near the secondary panel array and watched. She did not say anything during the calls, which I appreciated. She watched the way she did everything, with complete attention and no wasted movement. And when I finished one call and looked at my notes before starting the next, she was always looking at the same thing I was looking at. In between calls I explained briefly what I was doing and why. She asked clarifying questions that were short and precise, and demonstrated that she had understood the explanation and was building on it rather than asking me to repeat myself. She had, I thought, the specific intelligence of someone who has been in proximity to careful thinkers for long enough that careful thinking had become her native mode. When the calls were done and the documentation was filed, I made notes on what remained to be done in the morning. She watched me make notes. "You are filing something," she said. "Several things," I said. "Will they work?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, which is the only way I know how to answer things. Some of them will. Some of them are there to create delay, which is almost as useful as resolution. Delay gives other things time to happen. "What other things?" she said. "The Thrani House Compact liaison has been notified of your location and that you are unharmed," I said. "The platform station commander will be notified that a miner in temporary protected status is aboard under crew welfare provisions. I'll handle that in the morning before the compliance division opens." A concurrent jurisdiction review request has been filed through the Environmental Compliance Channel, which requires a response within 14 standard days before any population audit findings become actionable. I looked at my notes. Your mother's administrative hold is technically a treaty documentation review, which cannot run concurrently with a dependent welfare review involving a minor family member. I have filed the conflict of process notification. The two reviews cannot proceed simultaneously under Compact Administrative Code, which means neither can be completed until the conflict is resolved. She was quiet for a moment, processing, the iris shift visible even across the engineering bay in the console light. "And resolving the conflict takes time," she said. "It takes the time of whoever is assigned to resolve it," I said. "I have some reason to believe it will not be assigned to someone who will rush." She considered that. "You know a great deal about administrative procedures." "I have had 30 years to learn which pipes are leaking and which joints are load-bearing," I said. She looked at me, the iris shift again, slower this time. Then she said, "My mother says the same thing, about pipes. She says power works like a water system. It goes where the pipes are pointed, and the people who control the pipes control everything downstream. She is right, I said. She will be glad to know, she said, that someone fixed the junction C7 coupling. She said this very precisely, very deliberate. The same voice she used for everything, except that at the end of it there was the very faint shape of something else in it, something that was not quite humor but was in the same family. I looked at her. She was not smiling. I did not know, yet, whether Vale smiled or whether that was something she had set aside along with trusting people, but there was something in the amber eyes that was adjacent to it, a recognition, an acknowledgement between two people who both understood what the sentence meant. "Tell her yourself," I said, "when she gets here." She did not hold my hand that night. What she did was sit on the floor of the engineering bay, with her back against the secondary panel array, and fall asleep there while I was finishing the last of the documentation. I found her at 2200 when I looked up from my console. She had the thermal wrap pulled around her, and her silver plates coming undone again, and her three-fingered hands folded in her lap. Her breathing had gone slow and even. I got a second thermal wrap from the supply locker. I set it over the one she already had, without waking her. Then I went back to my console and worked until midnight. The next morning she was gone when I woke up. I had fallen asleep in the engineering chair, which is not comfortable but which I have done before and expect I will do again. And the two thermal wraps were folded on the floor with a precision that had become familiar. On top of them was a small object, a flat disc of pale composite material, the kind used as identification markers on Vithrani household items, inscribed on one side with the Vithrani sigil that means, depending on context, either debt owed or return promised. I set it on the communications console. At 7:30, the station commander Orvath came to the engineering bay and stood in the doorway, and looked at me with the expression I recognized as her doing the math face, which was a specific arrangement of her features that meant she had information she was processing, and had decided to come to me before processing it fully. "I have received notification," she said, "of a concurrent jurisdiction review request filed through the Environmental Compliance Channel." "Yes," I said. "I have also received notification of a Dependent Welfare Protective Status registration for a minor crew member temporarily aboard." "Yes," I said. "And the Vithrani House Compact Liaison has sent a direct communication to my personal channel." "I expect so," I said. She looked at me. Orvath was a Vithrani woman in her late 50s, platform-weathered, who had been running agricultural operations in the Outer Ring for 20 years. She was not easily surprised. She was, at this moment, doing the thing she did when she was not surprised but was deciding how much of that to show. "The child," she said. "She has been aboard for 12 days, I said. "She's been using the C7 crawl space as temporary housing. I have been managing her dietary needs through the Crew Welfare Supplemental Request Channel." "The Supplemental Request Channel," Orvath said. "Nutritional supplement," I said. "For engineering staff, it is in the regulations." She looked at me for a while. Then she said, "The Water Rights Compliance Division has signaled an intent to resume their audit of this platform. The conflict of process notification you filed will delay them, but they will return." "Yes," I said. "That's why I filed everything else first." She looked at the sigil disc on the communications console. She looked at me. She said, in a different tone, not the commander tone, the other one, the one that meant she was speaking as herself rather than as Orvath of Myrth 7. "Is she all right?" "She is a careful and observant child who dislikes people," I said. "She is managing." Orvath said something in Vithrani that I did not catch, but which had the cadence of either a curse or a prayer, and which might have been both. Then she said, in standard, "I will brief the platform crew on the protected status protocols, and I will look the other way regarding the supplemental request channel." I appreciate it, I said. She turned to go. At the door she paused. She is the princess consort's daughter. Yes, I said. Her mother is one of the few house voices in the water rights negotiation with any genuine platform access proposal, Orvath said. She said it to the doorframe, not to me. A proposal that would extend agricultural platform access to populations in the Sorathi outer settlements who currently have no formal food production rights. Families living on boats, living on water, with nothing to grow on and no claim to any structure that floats above the waterline. She was quiet for a moment. 20,000 families. I'm aware of the proposal, I said. Yes, she said. I imagine you are, she left. Vale came back at noon. She came into the engineering bay without knocking. There is no door to knock on, but she had been knocking on the access panel of the crawl space before she opened it, and the habit was in that lineage. And she sat on the stool she had been on the previous day, and she said, "The liaison has confirmed my mother is being held on a procedural hold. The conflict of process notification you filed is currently blocking the audit continuation." Yes, I said. How long will it hold? 14 days as filed. After that I can file an extension request which gives another 7. After that it depends on how quickly the concurrent review is completed, which depends on who is assigned to review it. I paused. I have some reason to believe it will not be assigned to someone who will rush. She nodded. She had brought the identification disk from the communications console. She was turning it between her 3-fingered hands, the way children turn things they are thinking about, the disk catching the console light on one side and going dark on the other with each rotation. What does it mean? I asked. The sigil. It means I owe you a return, she said. In the Vithrani second branch tradition, when someone does something that cannot be paid for immediately, you give them that. It means you are owed and the debt will be honored. You don't owe me anything, I said. She looked at me with the amber eyes, patient, precise. You gave a wrong answer to the gray suit people, she said. You brought broth that was not quite right but was close. You left a thermal wrap in a crawl space and listed it as surplus inventory. You filed 17 different procedural documents in 14 hours to slow down a compliance audit and protect someone you had known for 12 days. She paused. You owe me nothing. I owe you considerably. She said this with the precision of someone who has been raised to understand that debts are real things, not social gestures, and that casual dismissals of them are imprecise and therefore unacceptable. All right, I said, then we'll call it a loan. She looked at me, the iris shift. A loan requires repayment terms. When you're ready, I said. She thought about that. Then she set the disk down on the console and went to look at the secondary panel array, which displayed the current water pressure readings for all 4 levels, and the outer ring in a format that required some familiarity with agricultural platform engineering to interpret. Level 2 desalination output is lower than yesterday, she said. Seasonal atmospheric variation in the outer ring pressure differential, I said. The array compensates automatically. It will correct by 1500. She studied the display. How do you know when the variation is seasonal and when it is a system fault? The pattern, I said. A fault spikes and holds. It does not recover on its own, and when you look at the surrounding readings they show the cause. A seasonal variation curves down and curves back. The recovery is in the data before it finishes falling. She studied the display for a while longer. She pointed to a reading on the level 3 secondary loop. That one. That one is a slow seal degradation on the inlet filter housing, I said. It has been drifting for 3 weeks. I have the replacement part. I will install it on Thursday. Why Thursday? Because it has another week before it affects output, and I have 2 higher priority repairs before it on the schedule. She looked at the display. She looked at Thursday's readings as if she could see them in the current data, which, if you know how to look, you can. Show me how you see it, she said. So I showed her. We spent the rest of that afternoon at the secondary panel array, going through the platform's water pressure data the way I would go through it with a junior technician, not simplifying it, just explaining the logic. She asked questions that were short and built on the previous answers. She did not ask the same thing twice. When she understood something, she acknowledged it with a slight nod and moved to the next thing. And when she did not understand, she said so without apparent discomfort, which is a quality worth more than most people think. By 1700, she could read the level 4 readings and identify which variations were noise and which were worth watching. She was not wrong once. The Vithrani House liaison arrived on the Thursday shuttle, 4 days later. He was a young man with the formal bearing of someone who has been in diplomatic service long enough to have forgotten how to be casual, and he looked at the engineering bay and at Vale sitting on her stool next to the panel array with a tablet in her lap. She had been working through the platform's historical pressure data, building her own record of which patterns were seasonal and which were faults, because that was the kind of child she was. And he said the formal words for the house's acknowledgement and gratitude. Vale listened to him. She looked at me. "He's going to take me to the transit station at Leth 7, she said. "My mother's hold is being administratively contested. The conflict of process notification you filed." "Yes," I said. "That will take approximately 60 more days to resolve. During that time, the hold cannot be enforced. Your mother cannot be required to remain in administrative custody while a concurrent dependent welfare review is pending." The liaison's formal bearing adjusted slightly. He had not known the full mechanism. He knew the result. I had given him the architecture. "The water rights proposal," Vale said, "not to me, to the liaison, my mother's position." "The House is supporting her position," he said. "The contest is underway. There are complications, but the foundation is sound." She nodded. She set the tablet down on the console, carefully in the place where she had been setting it each day, the same place, oriented the same way, because she was that kind of person. She picked up the sigil disc. She held it for a moment, looking at it, and then she set it back down on the console beside the tablet. She slid off the stool. She picked up the thermal wrap that had been folded on the supply shelf where she put it every morning, her fold so precise you could have used the edge as a straight line. She tucked it under her arm. She looked at me. "The level 2 desalination array," she said. "The output will spike Thursday afternoons. The pattern is in the compensation module's secondary log. It is not a fault. It is the tidal pressure cycle from Orvith's fourth moon, which passes through the equatorial plane at 1440 every Thursday." "I know," I said. "I'm telling you so you don't misunderstand the data," she said. "I appreciate that," I said. She came and stood beside me. I was sitting at the communications console. She stood there, close enough that I could see the way she had redone her plates that morning, neater than any previous day, the maintenance cord replaced at some point with what appeared to be a thin strip of silver fabric, the kind used as indicator tape in the upper deck equipment panels, and she looked at the console. Then she reached out and took my hand. Not quickly, not the way a frightened child grabs for something, deliberately. The careful speaker way, her 3 fingers and thumb wrapping around my fingers, her small lavender hand finding the shape of mine, and she held it. She did not squeeze. She did not look at me. She just held it, and I did not move, and the platform hummed around us and the gas giant turned below, and I did not count the time. It was a long time. The liaison was in the doorway behind us. I heard him breathe. I did not look at him. Neither did she. When she let go, it was the same deliberate way she had taken hold. No announcement, just the quiet end of the thing. She straightened the thermal wrap under her arm. She looked at the console once more. Then she walked to the door where the liaison was waiting. At the door she stopped. Without turning around, she said, "The broth, it is the 4th spice in the blend. half the standard measure. That is why yesterday's was better than the first day's. Noted, I said. She walked out. The Vithrani House Princess Consort's administrative hold was lifted 58 days later, when the concurrent review process concluded in her favor. The water rights proposal, which the Compliance Division had been using the hold to suppress, moved into formal treaty negotiation the following month. I know this because Orvath told me. She came to the engineering bay and stood in the doorway, the way she does, and said, "The treaty negotiation commenced this morning." And I said, "Good," and she left, and I went and fixed the level 3 coolant junction that had been developing a pressure irregularity for the past week. The sigil disk is on the communications console. I have not moved it. The folded thermal wraps are on the supply shelf where she left them. I have not moved them either. There did not seem to be a reason to. On Thursday afternoons, when the level 2 desalination output curves up from its low point and returns to its correct value, the tidal pressure cycle from Orvath's fourth moon, passing through the equatorial plane at 1440, I do not look at it the way I look at all the other ordinary readings that systems make when they are working. I look at it the way I look at the sigil disk, the way I look at the thermal wraps, the way I look at the place on the console where a small lavender hand rested in mine for a time I did not count. Some things are not faults, they are just patterns, and the difference between a fault and a pattern is that a pattern returns. I work my rounds. I fix the pipes that are breaking and maintain the ones that are not. The platform hums. The gas giant turns below us, banded in teal and amber gray, turning in the dark the way it has always turned and will turn long after the platforms are gone and the people on them have sorted out, or failed to sort out, the question of who gets to stand on them. The broth is better now. I got the ratio right. Fourth spice, half measure. I make it sometimes on cold shift mornings when the circulation fans are on their low setting and the level 4 corridor is quiet and the warm pipes run their particular sound through the deck plates underfoot. I make it and I drink it and it is good, and that is enough.